Okay. So, my topic today is the period of Tourkokratia. Power, a period when the Orthodox Church of Constantinople, first and foremost, was under the power of Ottoman sultans. But the point is here, and the chief problem is that Turkocracy began much earlier than the Ottomans themselves, because the Turkish conquest of Byzantine lands was a very gradual process and took place for centuries. And moreover, it is very interesting how these Turks, especially Ottoman Turks, but also other Turks of Asia Minor, how did they understood Byzantium? To some extent, it's a difficult topic. Why? Because when we are going to study Christian and Muslim interactions, there are so few sources which share some common ground. It's difficult to find a whole vision of Islam and Christian sources, and vice versa, the image of Christianity in Islamic sources is also quite distorted. And for example, I wanted to begin my lecture from a citation from Kemal Pashazadeh, who was a historiographer of Mehmet Fatih, and whose account is just was published, and it still requires translation into European languages. And when Kemal Pashazadeh, when he wrote how Mehmet Fatih wanted to conquer the empire of Trebizond, he is writing this. Yes. And you can guess. The malicious nation, Theifia, called Romans, for malicious faith of the Christians of old, took this lens of the climate of Rome. He is using that Arabic geography notion of climate, famous for its pleasant weather and charm of landscape. They lived in the littoral of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, in the places of fine breeze, and every region had its own independent ruler, whom they customarily paid, whom they customarily called Takvur. Takvur is Armenian name for a king which the Turks borrowed, and whom they showed submission and paid haraj and military taxes. And also, some time ago, some of those bees were defeated, and the Sultan wanted to expel the rest, and he wished to raise high the banners of the Sultanate inside the aforementioned community, millet, of the false scripture. According to the plan, he first destroyed by the hand of war the Takfur of Istanbul, which means the Emperor of Constantinople, who was the seminal ruler in that house of that community. That he forced to bow one by one the Takfur of Enes, which means the Gatiluze of Inez Island, Enos Island, south of Constantinople, the Takfur of Mara, which means despot of Marea, and the Takfur of Amasra. It's very interesting that he is calling emperors, even those Latin potentates who had possessions around the remaining Byzantine lands. And from this point of view, it is very interesting that the Ottomans they had no coherent vision of Byzantium as a whole empire. They saw Byzantium as an agglomeration of smaller states, and this vision comes about by nature from the Ottoman conquests. Because when the Ottomans conquered this or that land, they signed an agreement with local authorities, and usually these local authorities were a local bishop. For example, we are not having a Berat Ottoman document of submission. When Ottomans took Yanina, the city in western Greece, it dated to 1423 something or 1429. It's very interesting that they are making this agreement, not with the Byzantine authorities who had to cede the territory, but with the Bishop of Arta. of those lands, who was responsible now for that Christians now under Ottoman power. They understood to some extent Byzantium from the point of view of church dioceses, church provinces, and divisions, with whom they concluded treaties of submission. And when we are going to about the period of Tourkokratia and the system of millet, which the Ottomans established. Millet as a congregation. It's translated as the word from Arabic, but it means a congregation, first and foremost. We need to notice that there were precedents of such situation. First and foremost, what is the most, this, you know, that early Christian history, Christians lived naturally under the power of pagans, but this can go as an example. But when we're having Muslim conquest, one of the best examples of how the Muslims transformed the Christian church, it would be perhaps Mozarabs of Spain. It means that Christians of Spain and the bishops of Spain who were in under Arabic power, they had no way of communicating with Rome. And when we are having, say, for example, Spanish Reconquista, in many cases, people of the Reconquista, they also destroyed Mozarab Church too, and they established the Catholic Church, despite of the fact that they were the same faithful. In the case of Byzantium, we are having a number of Christians under Muslim power, where after the great Arabic conquests. And these people were usually called Milkites or the Milkites. To some extent, this term now is obsolete because sometime in 18th century, I wrote the date you can see 1728, I think, yes. 1724, Patriarch of Antioch Cyril the sixth went into communion with Rome, and the Melkites divided. And nowadays, the Melkites are usually um, uh, Arab and Greek Orthodox Christians who are in communion with Rome. But in the past, the term designated the Christians on the Muslim lands under the protection of the Byzantine emperor, who was called Nalka. It's Aramaic word, same as Arabic Malik, which means a king. And we know that these people maintain close contacts with Constantinople. It attested not only, say, by figure of John of Damascus, who was actually a Milkite, because he lived in Damascus, he was outside the Byzantine border when he was writing his writings against iconoclasm, but also considered by a number of art objects like the seals. I brought to you one seal of the 11th century. In the first side, you see, on the obvious side, you see uh, God help to your slave, to your servant. And on the reverse side, you are having Encania, which means that the seal, obviously, was somehow connected with Jerusalem. Because Encania, you know, it is celebrated after the veneration of the True Cross as a birthday of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. But this seal is actually a copy of the seals of powerful Byzantine minister Basil Notus. And concerning the Melkites, I have to say to you, they were not much constrained only to Greek language. They also used Arabic and Syriac languages too, and they immigrated eastward. To some extent, the Patriarchate of Antioch until the middle of 14th century was the biggest Orthodox Patriarchate because his bishoprics were not only in Baghdad, called Babylon, but also in Armagis, in Shash, in the center of Central Asia, not far from the city of Samarkand. And we can find some Milkite communities even in the territories of China. And the status was quite interesting because actually the Ottomans, when they established the amulet system, they kept all these examples in their own head. The point is that the Byzantine Emperor, as a protector of the Christians outside the empire, it was one of his chief and very important functions. In particular, here you can see that you are having a translation of a letter which Mamluk Sultan. Remember, before the fall of Constantinople, the Ottomans were not the first ranking power. The first ranking power were the Mamluks of Egypt. So the most powerful Muslim potentate wrote to the Byzantine um, Emperor John Palaiologos, when you remember there was so few which remained of Byzantium. And of course, together with various Arabic epithets like basilisk, dragon, lion, and so on and so forth, he calls the emperor the, the natural ruler and king of all kings, Malik of all Maliks, the support and establishment of the religion of Christ, the autocrat of the Romans and all the coastal cities, the heir of the empire of Caesar, and the master of the rights of the Christians, the equitable for the people under his power, the only emperor of emperors of the believers in Christ, the master of thrones and crowns, the surveyor of the sea and the rivers, the emperor of emperors John, the master of Syria. And here the question arises why Byzantine emperor who passes down Constantinople and the Peloponnesus is called master of Syria. This designates the power of Byzantine Emperor, judicial power, of the Christians, Melkite Christians of Syria, but of Egypt too. They were called in many primary sources as Syriani, which means Syrians. And from this point of view, let me look first how gradually this period of Tourkokratia did begin. You know that in 11th century, in mid-11th century, Byzantium possessed not only a part of Syria, but also of whole of Asia Minor and a part of Armenia. And then in 1071, it happened the disastrous battle in Manzikert, and Byzantium actually lost the whole peninsula. The Turks, not only Seljuk Turks, managed to conquer the whole land and they established various emirates. And this brought about a very interesting notion. First and foremost, this invasion of the Turks meant a sharp and in many cases irreversible decline of the Orthodox communities, of the Orthodox Church organization in Asia Minor. Many people were forced to run away from the high highlands of Asia Minor to the lowlands and under the Byzantine power. Moreover, this period is marked by substantial changes in the church organization per se. And also, this period is very interesting from this point of view. Look, the coming Turks were Muslims. We know that the previous Arabic invasions, they brought about lots of Byzantine resistance in Asia Minor too. And we're having a number of saints. For example, the holy martyrs of Amorium, for example. But when we go to the Turkish invasion, silence. We are having no geographical sources for this period. No particular saint is attested for that period until the Ottomans. And the question arises why this happened, why it was so disastrous, but without that much of Christian resistance. The signs of disaster were clearly visible in the so-called Notizia Episcopatum Ecclesiae Constantinopolitana. What does this mean? The Byzantines made lists of bishoprics under under Patriarchate of Constantinople. It is a quite common source. There is a very conservative source, which the point is that it reflects the division of the Roman Empire, because all those metropolitan sees and dioceses, they were following the borders of dioceses of the time of Diocletian, Emperor Diocletian, and of this time actually, and of Emperor Constantine the Great especially. Which means in many cases that many of these church provinces were cut into by the coming Turks. Until the middle of the 14th century, the list of bishoprics and their sequence in honor more or less the same. But suddenly, in the middle of the 14th century, we are facing a very interesting situation. We are having the so-called notizia made by Emperor Andronicus III Palaiologos, which means 1320s, 1350, 1340s. And you can see, I do not know, I'm not sure, I will be translating a bit of Greek, but can see the first line. It reads that Metropolitan of Thessaloniki is now having 11th place, whilst in the past he was 16th. Metropolitan of Trebizond is holding the place of Metropolitan of Caesarea, and the consequences of these decisions even felt nowadays. You know that now Metropolitan of Caesarea is the Patriarch of Romania. It is one of the titles of the Patriarch of Romania. So, from this point of view, what happened? The church centers, which were within the Turkish border, which were under Muslim power for a century or more, they begin to lose their importance in the order of bishoprics. And new sees were allocated to the bishoprics which were on the Byzantine border. At the same time, we're having a number of documents also of the 14th century attesting the problems in the Byzantine Church. First documents actually they could go from 12th century of the time Komneni period, because Constantinople was literally swamped by metropolitans and bishops who ran away from the Turks. And Alexius I Komnenos even insisted himself that these people, that the metropolitans and bishops should return back to their flock, not to rejoin Constantinople. But the real picture, what happened in those lands now not under power of the Byzantine Emperor, is clearly seen from one very interesting document, which is called Register of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And it covers, just by chance, mostly the documents of from the beginning to the end of the 14th century. These documents were saved by Agier Gislen de Busbek, that famous ambassador of the Habsburgs in Istanbul, who noticed that in Patriarchate of Constantinople, people were putting into being some documents. He took them, managed to bring them through the Turkish customs, and now these precious documents are in Vienna. What they show? They show, for example, that around the empire of Trebizond, all those metropolitan sees which were outside were moved within the territory of the empire of Trebizond. They show a considerable number of impoverished places and locations where the Christians were no more. They show also, which is very important, the financial decline of the church. And the most interesting, it shows also that despite of the protection of the Byzantine Emperor, we are having actually no precise rules established. The situation was very unstable. And one ruler, the Christians are okay. Next ruler, his son comes to power, and then the persecution begins. And from this point of view, the most difficult period, perhaps, for Byzantine Church at the time when there was still empire was that 14th century when the rest of Asia Minor was conquered, and the coming Turks established a number of emirates, among whom were the Ottomans. The Ottomans managed to win the final prize by establishing the Ottoman Empire and creating Ottoman state, which comprised not only Byzantium but also all those beyliks. And Ottomans were responsible for creating a system more or less stable within which the church could survive. But concerning this, some elements of conversion of Christians to Islam and some elements of position of the church in the Muslim society, they were established well before the Ottomans. First and foremost, most of the church possessions received the status of a waqf. Waqf is a category in Islamic law which means a pious foundation. Islamic law means a pious foundation. What does this mean? How to explain to you? Imagine yourself that I am receiving an income of approximately $1,000 per month, okay? From my estate. I can give $1 from this $1,000 for charity on a permanent basis. And this just $1 changes the status of my property. Henceforth, it is not regarded as a private property or a property of institution, but it is regarded as a pious property for charitable purposes. In many cases, the possessions of the Byzantine Church of Constantinople, what remained in Asia Minor, they received that waqf status. But Spiros Vrionis, whose piece I gave to you, he noticed that in many cases, the incomes from church waqfs went to Muslim pious foundations. It means that you take the money from the church possessions and transform this into the money to sustain mosques, Islamic schools, and so on and so forth. And this was the system which actually brought about but the impoverishment of the church in Asia Minor and in the Balkans too, under Ottoman power and before the Ottomans. Um, Another way of conversion was special Ottoman practices which were derived from the border zone, in particular the devshirme, when the Ottomans, took the boys in Christian villages, turned them Muslim, and educated them, and then these boys, now young men, they received an option to become janissaries or to become the servants of the palace. The status of the janissaries was very prestigious and were having some sort of way that even Muslims wanted to be janissaries because of these privileges. But this means also some sort of a connection between Christian and Muslim society because these boys they did not forget their past. We are having a number of evidences that they continue to support and protected Christian churches in their own homeland. At the same time, before the Ottomans were facing the transformation of the Patriarchate of Constantinople itself. At the time of decline of the empire, the Patriarchate began to take more and more functions onto itself. And we are facing the situation which was unprecedented in previous periods, when the Patriarch of Constantinople maintained diplomatic correspondence with foreign potentates, as some sort of independent body inside the empire. You can see here, for example, how the Patriarch of Constantinople addressed to various Orthodox rulers, and not Orthodox rulers too. And then another catastrophe took place. I mean the fall of Constantinople in 1453, which meant the end of the empire. And we now to understand fully what does this meant. First and foremost, this meant the disappearance of imperial power and of imperial institutions. This means also the disappearance of the Byzantine education system, which received no longer money from state treasury. This means also the Turkish Surgun uh, settlement of Muslims, or sometimes of Christian people, in the conquered city. And but for Christians, it was also important. Orthodox Christians, it is a very important date because obviously the fall of Constantinople in 1453 finished the union with Rome, Ferrara-Florence Union, which was, from the point of view of the law, active until the last day of Byzantine Constantinople. When Sultan Mehmed Fatih organized this conquest, he had a dilemma: how to present himself and how to organize that Christian society, Orthodox Christian society, now under his rule. And he decided to make what can be called and to establish the millet system. But this millet system, which the Sultan had established, was just a reminiscence of the previous relations between Christians and Muslims. What he did, he incorporated the patriarch into the state structure of the Ottoman Empire. First and foremost, he discovered and brought out of slavery the prisoner of war, Gennadius Scholarius. Scholarius himself was a very famous scholar and had a very interesting career. He began his youth as a so-called Byzantine humanist, as a pupil of Gemistus Plato, which means that in his youth he belonged to what can be called philosophical and pagan circles of the Byzantine Empire, because Plato inverted a system which revives Zeus and other Greek gods and goddesses, because he saw ancient Greece as an example for Byzantium. He wanted Athens and Sparta to thrive again, so to speak. Scholarius was also a member of Byzantine delegation of Byzantine embassy to the Ferrara-Florence Union. When he returned back, he was still not monk. He realized that it is absolutely doesn't go, and he became friend of Metropolitan Mark of Ephesus. And that was a real friendship, and it was under his influence. Hilarius became a monk and an influential writer. But it's very important to remember about Hilarius. He was absolutely and totally representing that stream in Byzantine theology which can be called Aristotelian, which is why he never accepted Palamism. In his writings, he just tried to avoid the problems of God's energies. Because if you are following the philosophy of Aristotle and believe that any uh, uh, new movement produces new subject, which means that if anything new appears just because of emanation, that you can't consider energy, God's energy, as a continuation of God, but rather as new gods. It was a common accusation of Palamas by his adversaries. And as Scholarius, it seems that he was largely on the second part. But nonetheless, he wrote the treaties against the Union, and he was a leader of the Orthodox Party before the fall of Constantinople. And on the 6th January 1453, when it became possible to live inside the city, Mehmed summoned Scholarius to his court, and you can see that mosaics, which is now in the Patriarchate of Constantinople, when you go to the premises of the Patriarch of Constantinople nowadays, you see this picture. Mehmed Fatih is giving special firman, which means the law, to Gennadius Scholarius. And this means that This means that the patriarch was responsible for collecting taxes from the Christians in many cases, or had to assist to it. Christian community received the right to settle its own disputes at the church, not to go to the Muslim court. I myself, as a scholar, was working in Turkish prisons, in archives of Turkish prisons, which contained the documents of from the beginning of 16th century. No document of a dispute between a Christian and a Christian was preserved. You are having only documents a Christian and a Muslim, and Muslim and a Muslim, but not Christian against Christians. Secondly, and this was a continuation of Byzantine practice too, because in late Byzantium, in many cases, it was the priests to exercise judicial power, especially in the territories where you are having no strong authority of the emperor. Also, she received the title of ethnarch, the ruler of Milet, full jurisdiction over the subjects. And moreover, the Patriarch of Constantinople was considered by the Ottomans as the sole representative of the Christian community. This had very important repercussions. Why? First and foremost, this means that other Christian communities outside the Patriarchate of Constantinople now were his. You know that the Patriarchate of Bulgaria was abolished and replaced by Ohrid, Archbishopric of Ohrid. Serbian lands only in Montenegro survived some sort of independent church. And very soon the situation when the patriarchs of Antioch and of Alexandria and of Jerusalem resided in Constantinople, the situation soon emerged too. And also, it is important to remember that this some sort of changes brought about. It was some sort of a paradox. On the one hand, you are having a submission of the Orthodox Church and becoming a part of a Muslim state, a real part of the Muslim state, not a separate but incorporated. But on the other hand, you mean a great expansion of the power of patriarch, which was unseen at the time of late Byzantium. To Mehmed himself about his identity is very interesting. Here you are having the portrait of Mehmed Fatih, painted by Italian scholar, and Mehmed is wearing here the garments of the Byzantine emperor. But I studied myself, and you can see, you can have Emperor John Palaiologos, who concluded the union in Ferrara, Florence. You can see traditional portraits of Mehmed, and you are having here in black and white the portrait of Mehmed Fatih in a German book published at the time of the fall of Constantinople. His portrait as Byzantine emperor. To some extent, Mehmed needed Christians inside his own state. Why? First, a number of Ottoman Temars were Christians, were having a number of Christian households and possessions. This was too big. Christians were many. Secondly, what was important for Mehmed was this. He maintained his correspondence with foreign potentates, with the Western Europe in Greek. The Ottomans didn't write them Arabic, which means that at the Ottoman court we are having a Christian chancery, with all organized according to the traditions of the Byzantine emperors. And the final way is somewhat less. It was the influence of harem. This influence goes from a stepmother of Mehmed Fatih, Mara Brankovic, who actually supported Mehmed when his own mother died. He considered her as her own mom. It is interesting that in modern Turkish film called The Conquest about the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Mara Brankovic is portrayed absolutely positively, and Mehmed granted to her a big territory stretching from Constantinople and itself to Athens, and Athens inclusive, she was protector of it, which means that many Christian communities there survived. The connections between the patriarchate and harem were sometimes took very interesting forms. When you see in the garments of the metropolitans and bishops very precious cloth, a silk embellished with flowers. This is very interesting because usually the clothes for patriarchate were made in Syrian factories at the harem of the Sultan. And it was customarily for Valida Sultan, the Sultan's mother, to send these clothes as gift to the Patriarch of Constantinople, which was later transformed into church garments. So the Ottoman Empire was expanding. And here, besides the Patriarchate itself, the survival were having two Orthodox states which became Ottoman vassals. First it was Romania, or better, and Moldova. Those two Christian states. Very soon, these states were ruled not by the original dynasties, but one of the last representative of it was Dracula, who was an Orthodox ruler of Wallachia, but also by Dragomans. And here we're having a very interesting question of survival of Patriarchate of Constantinople after the fall of the city itself. What happened? The scholars knew this fact, for after the fall of Constantinople, for 150 years, we're having almost no documents. We're having almost no documentary sources about whereabouts of the Patriarchate. What we're having is small chronicles, one of which I gave you for reading, that anonymous chronicle of Zoros, and it shows how quickly the patriarchate became a part of Ottoman state, including the bribery. Because you can see that each patriarch of Constantinople had to pay considerable sum, which was usually paid by rich Greeks of the city, and upon his accession to the throne. But this is a part of actually of elitism, the tax famine. If the patriarchate didn't pay taxes, then but was responsible for taxation of the Christians. This means that it was responsible for bringing additional money, and this was took form in the bribery, but it was within the Ottoman system. And around the church of St. George of Fanar, because the patriarch the churches were slowly converted into mosques. First, because St. Sophia was converted to the mosque upon the conquest. After that, it was the Church of the Whole Apostles for just 1 year, and Scholarius preferred to reside himself in Pomakaristas Church of Jami. In 1586, the Patriarch was expelled by the Sultan from the church and had to take the headquarters of the Church of St. George of Fanar. It is how the entrance is looking like nowadays. And the patriarchs were prohibited to have the churches with cupola, like Hagia Sophia, which is why the Church of St. George in Constantinople represents the old basilica type with a roof. And in the Ottoman society, the Phanariot Greeks became extremely influential because they were actually masters of economic life of the Ottoman Empire. It was them who paid for patriarchs to to take a see, and it was them to serve in the office of the dragomans, which means translators. It is that Christian chancery of the sultans. It means that a Christian could have had a career in Ottoman Sultanate, but the top of his career would be some sort of secretary, Christian secretary of foreign minister. And by having a number of families, many of these Phanariot families, they claimed the descendancy to Byzantine royal families. For example, Kuntukuzenos. It is also not only Byzantine royal family, but also a very important Phanariot family. And to some extent, they prepared what can be called the means of decline of the Ottoman Empire by what can be called hidden resistance. In particular, one of these dragomans, Alexander Mavrocordatos, whose library in Athens I studied, he wrote a treatise where he advised that the Ottomans should be corrupted by luxury, and thus the Ottoman Empire should more or less cease to exist. And but as I told to you, the chief problem was education. And the situation when the Greeks they see of Istanbul, even nowadays, they see of education outside the borders of Turkey or in the past outside of the Ottoman Empire, this situation actually appeared after the fall of Constantinople. The point is that the fall of Constantinople meant that the famous University of Constantinople, supported by the Byzantine emperors, was no more. What survived was the Academy of Patriarchate, which Patriarch Gennadius Scholarius transformed into a Phanar Greek Orthodox college. But this college later became uh, it gave secular education. It exists still nowadays in Istanbul. But in order to support the education of the priests, the Patriarchate established the Halki Theological School in one of Marmara Islands, which was survived until 1971 when it was closed by the decision of Turkish parliament on the grounds that it is a not secular institution. Theological education is not being permitted in Turkey. And at the same time, with that remaining education, but many of the Greeks they received education outside, especially in the big Greek community in Venice. And now by the Venice, you are having the University of Padua. This opened to some extent a window of Western influence over Patriarchate of Constantinople and during the time of Tourkokratia. You know, and the most telling figure he is a Patriarch Cyril Lucaris, who was the Patriarch of Alexandria and then Patriarch of Constantinople. And one of my pupils tried to write a dissertation about him, and which is why I know a bit more about him too. But Sadia Lucaris, he was constantly in political struggle in Constantinople because at his time we're having some influence of Jesuits at the Sultan's court. He was also responsible for correspondence with growing Russia and we are having in Moscow, for example, his letters to Tsar Michael of of the Romanov dynasty. The point is that sometime, and she was responsible also for reviving education because first printed Greek books in Constantinople, in Istanbul, were printed by him. There, before that, 100 years before him, the Greek printing was successfully established in Venice, but it was outside the Ottoman Empire. And sometimes we are having very interesting thing here that In the case of Cyril Lucaris, in Geneva, in Switzerland, there was published a confession of Eastern Orthodox Christians under his name. This confession is usually labeled as Calvinist, and this suggested because at this time you are having very interesting thing because Patriarchate of Constantinople it's not only the territory of Ottoman Empire, it's also territories of the Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth. And there you are having the rise of Calvinism, with whom the Orthodox were in contact. And I myself read this his confession, but what I have noticed, maybe Calvinist or not, but he is using the formulas which were accepted by the union with Rome in both lines and both Ferrara Florence. Consider this statement: the Holy Spirit proceeding from the Father by the Son. It is a so-called Greek adaptation formula for accepting Catholic understanding of the Trinity. Almost immediately, this publication was excommunicated, and the Synod of Bishops of Eastern Church, which means Patriarchate of Constantinople, of Jerusalem, and of Antioch, in this big synod in 1672, there was made a confession of Patriarch of the Theos of Jerusalem, which is fully Orthodox. But it was suggested that perhaps Cyril Lucaris was not the author of this thing, but it shows that probably having the increase in Western influence because the patterns of Byzantine education became lost. And when I was preparing to this lecture, I decided to check the sermons of Cyrus Lucaris because it is interesting how he was thinking. And one of the sermons which he made when he was Patriarch of Alexandria, which was entitled How a Kingdom how the achieving the kingdom operates people. There it is very interesting that when he was writing his sermon, his own writing is in Latin, not in Greek, which means his Latin education, which he received in Italy when he was young. But also very interesting how he is doing. He is demonstrating all the achievements of Western scholastics. For example, he is saying here, and Deus as bonus tripliter, which means God is of three parts, from essence, from source, and from appearance. That is orthodox statement, but it is expressed in quite Latin form. And it's very interesting that in footnotes, he is referring to the books which were somewhat outside a typical patristic education. He is referring mostly Augustine, St. Augustine of Hippo, and other books like published by Venetian humanists or the like. And so, finishing today's lecture, I have to say that the period of Tourkokratia, it is a very complex period when the Patriarchate of Constantinople assumed its early functions of being a political body. The first features of it appeared even before the fall of Constantinople, and it became an essential part of Ottoman state, which was also a feature not seen in the Muslim states before. And as such, we're having a unique position of the Patriarchate, which on the one hand we're having decline, we're having lots of crypto-Christians, people forced to profess Islam on the public and being Christians secretly in home, and this was a mass thing. We're having what can be called the pressure of the Ottoman state, but at the same time we're having a transformation of the Patriarchate which preserved lots of Byzantine identity. It influenced even modern Greek of nowadays. The so-called Kataivusa, the Greek which is very close to Byzantine and classical Greek, is still used by Patriarchate instead of much more simple colloquial Greek, which now became a part of Greek education in the country of Greece. And from this point of view, the patriarchate, to some extent, it keeps some very important Byzantine tradition in Kant, in Sinian, in running chancery, in maintaining the purity of the Greek language, but it had to transform its education system in the way that it became more Western-like. So it is this. I try to give you, I think it is enough for now. Yes, Father Andrew. God, thank you. I try to give you a bit unorthodox, not so unbalanced picture because as a historians, a catastrophe for us, as historians, a catastrophe doesn't always mean something, the end of something. The historical body survives and transforms, and our task is to proceed to see how it took place. Thank you. I don't know. Shall I stop sharing? Father Andrew, you can speak, please.
Uh,
Yes. To some extent, let me tell you also concerning Cyril Lucas, but consider Saint Maximus. No, the confessor, but yes, Maximus who moved to in Rus state under Ivan III, and who insisted in revising the books and so on and so forth, and he was banished from everything and spent much of his life in prison. Similar story.
Dmitry Alexandrovich, can you look at your chart,
Can you unmute?
please? Can you take a look at your chart? Why
Yes,
not mute? But I mean, can you open your chart, please, and see, because there are some questions. Yes.
I'd like to find the chat because yes, let me find it. Up.
Yes.
Yes, now I have the chat. Let me find it. Yes, I'm having yes. Was the creed and confessions of faith made at the first seven ecumenical council not known to Lucaris? Or if he knew them, did he comment about why he felt the need to write a new confession? It is very interesting thing that there was a synod in 2009 in Alexandria in Egypt, and they said that this confession perhaps did not belong to him, and he was proclaimed the saint of Alexandrian Church, Greek Church in Alexandria. Cyril knew this, but the point is that the same type of creed was used by many Greek theologians who opted with the union with Rome. Actually, that formula that Holy Spirit goes from Father through Son or by Son, it is the formula of unionists under the time of Michael Palaiologos. And so it is also another Greek tradition. And this formula sometimes appears from time to time. So Cyril of Lucaris, she is new, but she gave that interpretation, which is, I simply can notice it at once. That's all. Because this formula, it is that formula which formed the compromise in Ferrara-Florence Union. These people also knew. Yes, Dmitry Alexandrovich, thank you for now students may send the questions. Yes. Now, regarding the decline and disappearance of bishoprics in Highland Anatolia after Manzikert, did you say that this was primarily due to the flight of the part of Christians? You know, to the lack of geography from the spirits. Yes, completely. The point is that what can this? The Turkish invasion was the invasion of the Normans, and the Greeks were sedentary people. The invasion of the Normans means that you simply starve in the territory because they destroy your crops, they destroy your harvest, and which is why. And also, it was because this thing very quickly Christians on Turkish territory they very quickly became minority. By the middle of the 14th century, the majority of population of Asia Minor is Muslim. And those cities which you read, say, in Apocalypse, Church of Laodicea, Church of Ephesus, they were either on the brink of disappearance or disappeared completely. And from this point of view, the scholars think that the Turkish invasion it took the form not of religious invasion like of the Arabs before, but it was ethnic invasion. The Turks didn't think about let's convert those Christians to Islam. That came later. First, they destroyed economic prosperity of these lands, and then this became a new. Of course, some cities continued, and they changed the demographic balance. All the more that we're having a number of Muslim immigration from the depth of lands of Islam to Asia Minor, especially during the Mongol conquests. Did I understood correctly? Some elements of Waqf predated Ottoman rule in Byzantium. Yes, absolutely right. Waqf is a very old Islamic institution, and originally the scholars think that it's Christian. It represents special pious foundations recorded in Palestine in the 6th century. What makes Waqf special? It does not indicate the proportion of your sum and it indicates the change of status of your property. In many cases, for churches, to receive a Waqf status was a good thing because Waqf means that you are paying no taxes or your taxes are reduced. And your property cannot be confiscated easily because it's pious property. A ruler can confiscate private possessions if he wishes, but not the pious possessions. But in the case of Ishmael, it took a special form because in many cases, these Waqfs, Christian and Muslim Waqfs, they were together, mingled. And Muslim institutions used Christian money. That is. Which is why that meant economic decline, yes. Yes. During the study of Tourkokratia, uh, you will be having a copy of presentation. Yes, I will send my PowerPoint to Father and please use it. It is okay. Yes. During the study of Tourkokratia today, I'm on Greek or Turkish documents. Um, from the point of view of whereabout of the Patriarchate itself, Greek documents are more important. But let me tell you, I have been inside the Patriarchate. We were a group of Oxford students and our professors. They organized with us a meeting with the keeper of archives of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And I asked him because I was interested in the church history and which time of your Greek documents, which century, which time when they are abandoned? He replied, we were having terrible fires in Constantinople, in Istanbul. No less than 6 fires, after which 3 were absolutely disastrous. So, before 1596, we are having almost nothing. Then we are having documentary sources. So for the early period, for the history of the economic history of the church and of location of Greek people, sometimes what is good is tax registers of the Ottoman Empire. Tax registers, they show the church possessions. They show the Christians. In particular, I don't have, I'm having total mess with my shelves, but I'm not in my office. It's just a picture of my office behind me. But believe me, in my accommodation, it's the same picture, lots of books I can't find. But the tax register of Istanbul, Constantinople, some 3 years after the conquest by Mehmed Fatih, which dates to 1456, was published. And it shows how many churches and Christian settlements in Istanbul remained still intact with the name of the people who survived the conquest, the fall of Constantinople. The tax register is written as detective. It can be read as detective story. I postpone it for my own research. Myself am having an unpublished tax register, Ottoman. It's unpublished of Northern Northern Thrace, which was made just before the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. It has plenty of Christian villages, plenty of Christian cities too. And still there's a hope to find a picture of those settlements, how people lived before the fall. You mentioned presidential companies. You mentioned Mara Brankovic in your lecture. Could you explain on your role as a Christian figure? I vaguely remember from previous personal studies that she influenced support Christian communities under Ottoman rule at a high level. Is this true? Yes, absolutely true. Mara Brankovic, she established, as I mentioned in my lecture, special relations between the harem and the patriarchate. It is something which is not many studies about this. Not many studies about this. But we know that sometimes these women of the studies, they made pious foundations in favor of the patriarchate to not only mosques less. And Mara Brankovic also, she kept from Islamization a very big territory from Constantinople to Athos. And she also contributed to a special status of Athos under Mehmed Fatih. Because you can ask me, how many Christian cities became Muslim, or in the case of Thessaloniki, Jew? Jew were the majority in Thessaloniki, because the Sultan invited the Jews from expelled from Spain. But in Athens, we are having that monastic republic intact, with lots of sultans' privileges. And if you go to Athens and see those monasteries, I have been there once. You can see the sultans' berets in the museums or sometimes in the churches of this Athens. And these berets, these privileges, which the Ottoman sultans gave, they are still recognized by the Greek government. By the Greek government. So special financial status of Athos, and she also ensured this thing. Athos was outside Ottoman administration. Ottoman officials didn't come to the monastery. That is her influence too, perhaps, because she controlled. She had a very long life. When she died, I think she outlived Mehmed Fatih himself, which is why and the territory and the possessions and territories were respected. They were not confiscated back to the treasury. They remained private possessions or possessions of the monasteries to whom she gave gifts. I have heard the opinion that also the millet system was misestablished by Mehmed II. It was properly institutionalized only in the 19th century, when the Ottoman Empire began modernizing, and before that the amount of rights of Christians was entirely at the mercy of Ottoman officials, and the millet system was often disregarded. What do you say is this true? Um, it is actually a very interesting question, very good question, I have to say, but it shows the difference of medieval privileges and constitutional modern privileges. The point is that the talks about Turkish constitution and restrictions to the Sultan's power and granting constitutional rights to Sultan subjects were in the Ottoman Empire from the time of the Greek Revolution, which means 1920s. According to one of these projects, and you can find even on the internet the pictures when three millets are given their gifts to the Sultan. There was the thing that the Christians must receive special rights granted of free profession of faith, of free faith and so on and so forth, special tax deductions too, abolition of the taxes which the Muslims didn't pay, and so on and so forth, so to become fully equal to Muslim community. This project was, and this means actually what can be called the Ottoman Empire was seen as a union of three communities: Muslim, Christians, Armenian, four communities, and Jewish. Chief Rabbi of Constantinople. The point is that many of these privileges existed before, but they were not institutionalized. And many of things, Ottoman things, were in this way. The point is that it is not Ottoman authority, but rather prerogatives of the Sultan. Sultan has the right to confiscate any property. That made him different from any European ruler and of Russian Tsar. It is Sultan's right, which is why this means that in Ottoman Empire, approximately 70% of total land was state land. It is absolutely different from the Byzantine Empire. In Byzantium, emperor possessed 20-30% of the total land the most. But in the Ottoman Empire, because of the conquest, it was the Sultan that possessed the most of the land and had the right to confiscate any property, even the Waqf property, if need be. And from this point of view, you can see one and the same story happening. A sultan granting privileges to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. He, like Mehmed Fatih, issues a law, the Berat. B-E-R-A-T, Berat. New sultan comes, and he has the right to revise the laws of his predecessor. What he says, I don't follow the Berat, pay more sum, and I will confirm it. Something like that. Which means that the whole Ottoman structure, medieval structure, made these boundaries of millet flexible. In 19th century, it was the thought that the boundaries of millet should be firmly established. Constitutional guarantees to the Christians. It didn't happen too. Once the Patriarchate was integrated into the system of the Ottoman government, was there any kind of reciprocity from the government in response to obedience from the Patriarchate? Were any subsidies given, any funding? Also, was sacrilege or disrespect in Christian churches in any way the offense the government suppressed or not? First and foremost, from this point of view, I know the Ottoman, very good question, excellent. This is and first, the Patriarchate received from the state iltizam, which means tax famine. This is privilege by itself. Tax famine, do I need to explain to you the term? Tax famine means this. For example, you are a sultan, correct? You need to collect taxes from a particular province. Okay. And you are afraid that people will not give you the necessary sums, and you are having not enough state apparatus to suppress them. Therefore, you call for yourself to call some people and you tell to them, I give you this province. Collect as much as you can. But out of this, give me the tax allocated sum. That means tax farming, which means some sort of a business between the Sultan and his official. And this tax farming was granted in many cases to Patriarchate of Constantinople, in particular Bulgaria, in some parts of Serbia too. It was, and to some extent, and but not in Eshimana, because Eshimana was impoverished, almost no Christians. But it had, so it was some sort of an opportunity to raise additional monies. That is this. This right of tax farming was abolished only with foundation of the Turkish Republic, actually. Yes. Concerning Christian churches, see, it is very interesting question. Either I can give you about this additional lecture. What is this? Churches were officially under the protection of Muslim government because Muslim community, the Zimmi, means the community, Christian community, the Zimmi, means the community under the protection of the Muslims. Still now, the Turks rights. There is a difference between Greeks, Yunani, and Greeks, Rumi. Yunani are those who are not obedient to us, which means Greeks of modern Greece. Rumi are those who had an oath of obedience to us. We protect Rumi. That is modern Turkey. In modern Turkey, in some press. And the ones. There was also, however, a special document called Rules of Caliph Amar. The document appeared largely in the 12th century, but it was ascribed to Caliph Amar when he entered Jerusalem during the Great Arabic Conquests. What does this mean? You have no right to repair churches. You have no right for bells. You have no right to establish a cross on your roof. You have no right to perform public funeral. You have no right to bring the gospel book outside the church building, and so on and so forth. Lots of prohibitions. It is very interesting. I checked the travelers' accounts in Asia Minor in 14th, 15th centuries, and they say, Muslim travelers, and they say the Turks are not following the rules of Caliph Omar. Christians can bail, they can have crosses on public display, and so on and so forth. But when Millet system was established, and by Mehmet Fatih, then in this or that place, the rules of Caliph Omar began to be employed. If you go to Istanbul now, many churches are having no crosses. And they are completely closed. They are open only on Sunday mornings, and I myself use this option to sneak in. But in other parts of the day, they are closed as if no one lives there. Nothing of that. But they are also having some Christian symbols outside. It is okay. So not the whole implementation of the rule is being made. That is. So from this point of view, it's very interesting. So the Ottomans, but I have to say to you, Ottoman Empire is not classical Islamic state. Ottomans use tax farming. It's prohibited by Sharia law. Ottomans used usury, bank percent, prohibited by Muslim law, and so on and so forth. In many cases, they gave these activities to Christians. The but with regards to Patriarch Lucaris and his conversion connections to Westerners, were the interactions with his associates that intended to make the West support the survival of the patriarchate, where there are mostly theological correspondences. At this time, it was impossible for the West to support the patriarchate. That is the point. The chief income of the patriarchs came largely from Russia in the form of the special payments of Russian czars for well-being, which were quite active until Peter the Great and actually Catherine the Great too. Well, I think for the end you can give you a whole lecture about it, how the Russian authorities supported the Patriarchate of Constantinople in 18th and 19th century. It is a special topic. But concerning Western, it is not this, but we are having, it was a channel of communication. Many priests of Patriarchate of Constantinople, they received education in Western universities. They received Catholic education because Constantinople itself, Istanbul itself, did not give them such an opportunity. Which is why it is affected in Russia too, because Lichud brothers who established Slavonic Greek Latin Academy, they came from Constantinople, I think, and they established exactly the same pattern of education, a mixture of Byzantine and Western, which was in the Patriarchate of Constantinople before the reforms of Peter the Great. And that is some sort of West contributed how? Of course, theological things, publications, print. Most of Greek prints are outside. It's in Venice, it's in Italy. Moreover, this Greek print, they reproduce Greek manuscripts. And these books, they cost fortune now. And very beautiful. But it was in Venice, not in Istanbul. The Patriarchate of Constantinople maintained also a very big scriptorium, and they were also in contact with chief authorities in Western Europe, not only uh, Rome. When Archbishop Laud of England, you know who is Archbishop Laud, the chief advisor of Charles I Stuart, actually Prime Minister of Britain, Protestant. He wanted to make a new Bible, which resulted finally in King James Bible. And for that, he was buying lots of books. He bought lots of manuscripts from the scriptorium of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And I myself studied these Greek manuscripts when I was in Oxford. They are just beautiful, which is why. And from this point of view, there were constant connections, but it seldom took place of financial support because Ottomans were always suspicious of it. The Ottoman authorities did not allow it. Yes, 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 please. We're having the prayer now. I'm finished my answers. Father Henry, please.
Достойно есть такого истину, блажите тебя, Богородицу, пресноблаженную и пренепорочную, и Матерь Бога нашего, честнейшую Херувим, и славнейшую без сравнения Серафим, без исления Бога Слова росшую, сущую Богородицу тебя величаем.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Father
students.
Henry,
Thank you for
please
going out.
illuminate me what you expect me. There will be seminar after.
Uh,
Thank you.
we have
Thank you.
right.
Thank you.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, this one's, you told to me урок and
Right,
lecture. You wanted me what? Both or one? I don't know, simply.
No, that's it.
You can speak English because I understand this just election. Good, good. Because so they have the so this means that I say goodbye to you now. You can speak and subtitles will appear.
Oh, that's right. Okay. I see what you mean. I will talk to you on Facebook. Okay, I will catch with you on Facebook.
Now.
Yeah, okay. I can do it now.